if there's anybody that covers the Bombers and the Jets like anybody else, this is your guy. It's Darrin Bauming. Welcome back to the all-new SportsCage. And Darrin, I would say you're a writer for the CFL Football Writers of Canada. Is this what you thought would be happening in the West Final, even though the Bombers started 0-4?
No, absolutely not. You know, when a team starts 0-4 and then sits at 2-6 on a short week, going up against a bye week rested, then West Division leading BC Lions team for a back-to-back, I honestly thought it was going to be a battle for the rest of the season for Winnipeg to make the playoffs. So to see them capture a fourth straight West Division title and host this game for a fourth straight season is incredible. It's absolutely incredible. And, you know, the Blue Bombers have had a lot of fortune along the way. They've had a lot of fortune over the last 4 seasons as they try to make it to a fifth straight Grey Cup. But you know what they say, you got to be good to be lucky, and you got to be lucky to be good. This is a very, very good Winnipeg Blue Bombers team and organization, top to bottom. So when they were 0-4 and 2-6 and, you know, the Lions and you know, you're the team you guys cover out there in Saskatchewan, the Rough Riders were clicking and firing on all cylinders early in the season, led by Mike O'Shea. They stayed on message. We're only concerned with ourselves. We're going to try to get to 1-0 every single week. And despite losing a lot of really talented players, Dalton Schoen, Adam Bighill probably leading the list for the season, losing those guys, Winnipeg has just kept their nose to the grindstone. Lunch pail, hard hat, off to work they go.
So how did they overcome the deficit? Was it mental, physical, all of the above?
Yeah, I honestly think it was mental. You know, this team prior to Mike O'Shea, I would say, you know, if they were down a touchdown or down a couple scores, the body language absolutely slouched, right? And with Mike O'Shea, we've seen this team mount incredible comebacks. It's the crazy football league. No lead is safe. And, you know, this season I think is a great example that no lead is safe even in the CFL standings. But they know that they're always in the fight. They know that if they just do what they need to do, can't do anything about the past, just focus on the future, that they're going to be okay. I love the way Zach Collaros puts it. He, you know, talks about snap and clear. A lot of athletes use the cliche, just flush it and move on. He snaps and he clears it. And maybe that's kind of a, you know, an entendre on snapping the football. And, you know, the next play is all you can really focus on. He's thrown a lot of interceptions this year. He needs to be good to, you know, counter the incredibly efficient Trevor Harris. I was so impressed with him in the West semifinal against the BC Lions. Maybe the passing yardage numbers weren't eye-opening, but his play was to me. If Collaros wants to neutralize that Saskatchewan Roughriders offensive attack, Winnipeg needs to do it with their quarterback as well. So snap, clear, and focus on what you can control. That's the way this Blue Bombers team is, and it's all, to reiterate, because of Mike O'Shea and how he's coached this team and built this culture over the last better part of a decade now.
The all-new SportsCage with Darrin Bauming from @Bonfire Sports joining us. We're talking all things Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Outside of the act of God and the gust of wind out of nowhere when Montreal punt, here's the thing where I went, uh-oh. Not that Winnipeg wasn't for real, but the way that they were able to come back in that game, and they were able to stop Montreal twice from gaining a first down to get the ball back so they could kick that field goal. And I'm like, that's what a good team that knows how to win does. So this is 6 Western Finals, 4 at home. Like, the nucleus is there, and the Riders have been playing some really good football, but the Bombers have as well. Is there anything that worries you about the Bombers come Saturday when we finally kick off the West Final?
I honestly think it's just kind of the history between these two teams. And the trend has been the Rough Riders have lost pretty much all of their games in recent memory here in Winnipeg. Going back, I can't remember what the streak is at. It's at 6 or 12 or something like that. And Winnipeg is won all of these West Finals over, recent memory. So it's pro sports. Nothing lasts forever. And I think, every dog has its day. And that's not to call anybody a dog in this. There'll be two dogs in a fight. I think it's going to be a really physical game. But the only thing that really concerns me, as far as, from a Blue Bombers fan perspective, is that nothing lasts forever. But that said, with where they started and where they are today and how they've been playing, rifling off 8 straight wins before losing to the Toronto Argonauts in week 19, said a lot about this team and the type of football that they're capable of playing. But any given Sunday, any given Saturday afternoon, we're going to see it go down at Princess Auto Stadium. And I have no doubt, this will be a very, very close football game.
Darrin Bauming joining us, of course, as we count down to kickoff between the Riders and Bombers. It seems like forever, but it's going to be here before we know it. When you look at the Bombers, Darrin, statistically on the defensive side of the football, they are tops in most defensive categories. What makes their defense so good?
Well, it's different this year than it was in past years. They call themselves the dark side defense. And I don't know really what goes into all that, but there's some strong personalities on that side of the football, as we know in the CFL, so often there are. But in years past, when Richie Hall was the defensive coordinator, it was led by a ferocious pass rush. Willie Jefferson, Adam Big Hill, a lot of good players and a lot of pressure on quarterbacks. Richie Hall is still in the building. He's no longer the defensive coordinator, but keeps a close eye on first-year defensive coordinator Jordan Younger. And while you go from Richie Hall, who is a safety, of course, as Riders fans know, during his playing days in this league, Jordan Younger is also a defensive back and played a little bit more close to the line of scrimmage. So it's interesting kind of looking at that different approach that they take to defensive football. This Blue Bombers defense is really led by the back end. And it's Dietrich Nichols, Evan Holm, Canadian standout this season, Tyrell Ford, a handful of others that are really, really good. Reddick Ramsey, a Canadian playing the dime or strong side linebacker spot. They only tend to rush 3, sometimes 4 players at the quarterback. And they'll rotate guys around and you never really know who those 3 or 4 will be, but that's generally what they do. And they cover very well downfield. Football people will call those cover sacks or cover pressures. And where Richie Hall would implement a lot of exotic twists and stunts and blitz packages, this Blue Bombers defense just lets Willie Jefferson and his crew up front do what they do and allow that, and really is led by that back end. Dietrich Nichols, I think, is right up there with Roland Milligan as the best defensive backs in the CFL today. I would even probably call those two guys 1A and 1B. So it's a different approach, but that's how Winnipeg is doing it this year. Losing Adam Big Hill for the season was a really, really tough pill to swallow. Is he at that same elite athletic level he was during his most outstanding defensive player seasons? No, but his eyes are his best weapon. So he's still able to help his teammates and kind of be a little bit of a player coach, even though his playing season is over. Tony Jones has been outstanding, and we look towards the depth chart coming out on Friday. I know you guys will be waiting for it just like me, kind of hitting refresh on the email to see, who's in and who's out. And for Winnipeg, Kyrie Wilson, who was ready to return off the 6-game injured list in the Labor Day Classic, and in the third and final meeting of the season between Winnipeg and Saskatchewan, and something happened in warm-up, and he hasn't played since. So he is very close to returning. Getting Kyrie Wilson with Tony Jones in the linebacking core really helps this Blue Bombers defense out a lot.
All right, we're talking Bombers, Riders, and the all-new SportsCage with Darrin Bauming from Bonfire, Winnipeg. You mentioned him, Tyrell Ford, and if there's a guy, now keep in mind, Roland Milligan was getting all the headlines all season, but if there is a guy that quietly, and it's not, if you're a Bomber fan, it wasn't quiet, you watched it all along. What a progression he has made. And to me, I think he's your defensive secret weapon. All the other guys may have a little more namesake, but it just seems like whenever a play needs to be made, and it wasn't just the interceptions, and they were good, the knockdowns, the coverage, or that they just wouldn't throw at him. It's all of a sudden, that was a draft steal, if you ask me, because for where he is in his career at this point, and you're like, it doesn't look like, barring anything happen, he won't be giving up that spot anytime soon.
Yeah, he ran something like a 4.35 at the CFL Combine back in 2022 and 2023, after a season of kind of just being a special teamer in Winnipeg, a Canadian rookie, as they often are, went to the National Football League, signed with the Green Bay Packers, was amongst their final round of cuts coming out of training camp. And he decided to hang around, keep working out in the States and wait for another NFL opportunity. That never came to fruition in 2023. So there he was in training camp in 2024, and we're starting to see him get early reps at field side corner. And we're like, wow, a Canadian at corner who's, played 1 year of pro football and not been, a big defensive contributor. Wow, what's this going to be all about? Early in the season, quarterbacks went after him and they started throwing at him, and he, started piling up the picks and great defensive knockdowns and was just incredible in coverage. And that's how we started to see more of Dietrich Nichols, where generally quarterbacks had never thrown Dietrich Nichols' way. He's their boundary halfback. So we started seeing Evan Holm get more action and Dietrich Nichols get more action. And, Terrell Bonds, their rookie at boundary corner, get a little bit more action and balls thrown their way. Quarterbacks didn't want to throw at Tyrell Ford. I think it's great to see a Canadian elevate his game so early in his career, be a starter, be a star, and be a Canadian in the Canadian Football League at a position we haven't seen a lot of players excel at. Defensive back, cornerback in particular. Tyrell Ford has had an outstanding season. He's a free agent this winter, guys. I'm really wondering if somebody's going to back up the truck and plop a bunch of cash onto his front lawn.
Interesting. Now, the one and only producer Colson just handed me the note. Bombers at home versus Saskatchewan have won 9 of the last 10 and 12 of the last 15, if you go back to 2013, just for those that are keeping score and record at home.
And Zach Collaros is 6-1, including 5-0 in Winnipeg in the playoffs.
But not wanting to tell you something you already know, Darrin. Of course, we know what's happening south of the border, and every vote matters. So I want to get your vote, because on the post-game show of the West semifinal, we had to agree to disagree whether the BC Lions played poorly or if the Saskatchewan Roughriders played really, really well. If you had to cast your vote, where would you say that game went in your analysis and breaking it down?
That's a great question. It's interesting that you guys throw that one at me, because all week I've kind of been tossing it back and forth with the East final. Did Ottawa play well, but not well enough to beat an explosion Toronto Argonauts team that just kind of kept their foot on the gas pedal? Or did they make enough, make the mistakes that cost them that game? Look, the West Division is always incredibly competitive. And I think BC, with the way they had been playing the final third of the season, even the final half of the season, I think they played okay. But with the changes they had at quarterback, with some of the drops, I'm remembering now from that semifinal game, I honestly believe overall that the Saskatchewan Roughriders beat the BC Lions. I don't think the Lions beat themselves. I think they were beat by a better football team. And in my opinion, and for my money, this is the West Final I was expecting, the West Final that I wanted personally. I take my job seriously. I try to be objective, but look, I'm a born and bred Winnipegger. I parked my fan card in my back pocket years ago when I started covering this team in 2011. It's a difficult thing to do, as I'm sure, your audience can try to empathize with. But objectively, this is the best rivalry in Canada. These are the two best teams in the West Division. And based on recent history, more ancient history, and just the way this season has gone between Winnipeg and Saskatchewan, and all the storylines of Zach Collaros and Pat Neufeld, and so many different connections and storylines between these franchises on and off the field. I'm glad it's these two teams. But roundabout answering your question, I think the Saskatchewan Roughriders did a great job against the BC Lions. And, I really believe that it was Trevor Harris that was the catalyst of it all. So impressed with his play.
We've got Darrin Bauming on the Western Pizza guest hotline here. We're talking Riders, Bombers. We're going to ask about the Jets here in just a bit because there's some rumors and rumblings coming out, and Darrin also is pretty close to that. Darrin, does it concern you that this year Zach Collaros has been hit more, even in that last game against Montreal, than he has been, it seems, in years past? So far, he's been able to bounce back. There's a few times where it's kind of like, all right, Zach, are you getting up? Every quarterback every player's one hit away from it not going further. As someone who watches with concern because of the concussion issues he had, even as a Rider fan, they got to keep him upright because he's been, I don't know, would you agree he's been taking way too many hits, especially in the second half of the season?
Well, we've seen what the league has done and worked towards for a few years now, and that's doing a better job at protecting quarterbacks. Have they gone a little bit too far in some areas? Some would argue that, roughing the passer or roughing the quarterback as they're running downfield and deciding to hook slide and all those sorts of things. I think that takes time to figure out, and it's a lot of judgment calls for those officials on the field whose job is not enviable, definitely not easy. But yeah, Zach Collaros has taken a ton of punishment. This offensive line in Winnipeg in 2024, not the dominant group that they have been when they had Jamarcus Hardrick, when Stanley Bryant was, playing his elite level football and was, back-to-back most outstanding offensive lineman in the CFL. It's not that same group. However, they are very good, and they've shown that in having the league's leading rusher in Brady Oliveira and, an offense that can most definitely score. It's just taken a few months for them to get acclimated to a very different group. But you ask Zach Collaros about the punishment he takes. You ask him about the way that officiating is handled and protecting quarterbacks and all of those sorts of things. He almost is at the point in his career where he just shakes his head and scoffs at it and won't speak to it anymore most of the time because he doesn't feel the league does anywhere near enough to protect him and to protect other marquee quarterbacks in this league. He takes a lot of hits. But for a guy who, a lot of people thought when Simone Lawrence hit Zach Collaros as a member of the Saskatchewan Roughriders just a few years ago, that was going to be it. And it's amazing how that butterfly effect really resulted in Collaros being a Winnipeg Blue Bomber today, being a two-time Grey Cup champion and now one win away from getting him to a fifth straight Grey Cup appearance. I think you're absolutely right. Every quarterback is one hit away. But Zach Collaros has shown just incredible toughness, nails, and resiliency to stay healthy in games and to stay healthy from game to game, and keep playing it at a very high level. It hasn't been his best year statistically, and the playoffs haven't been his best statistically, but you mentioned his win-loss total at home and in the playoffs and that sort of thing. He's still pretty good if you just kind of gauge quarterbacks at the number one metric I think people look at quarterbacking, and that's wins and losses.
And
Darrin, I don't know if we should.
Jason.
Well, I'll jump in, Darrin, and the question that I'm going to say is I don't know whether or not the three of us should feel shame or not, as we went 22 minutes of a conversation regarding the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and we didn't mention Brady Oliveira until you just did there.
No, by design, Dave, we don't mention Brady, and Brady doesn't show up on Saturday. We got nothing to worry about. that was all mind games.
See, but to me, I don't understand it, why he isn't getting his due, because the Rough Riders know all about him. They're preparing for him. He's nominated for the Most Outstanding Player Award again. Why are we taking so long to get and bring his name up in this conversation? Are we just taking him for granted? I don't know.
I think maybe a lot of people have taken Brady Oliveira for granted. He's young, he's Canadian, he's a tailback, and he's, was and the heir apparent, and now is kind of the protege to master from Andrew Harris, right? And in his Hall of Fame career, playing in this league. It's interesting, though, because Brady Oliveira's 3 lowest rushing totals this season have all come against the league's #1 rush defense, and that is the Saskatchewan Roughriders. They're head and shoulders better than everybody when you just look at the numbers. What is it, 80 yards per game they're allowing? I think next best is like 93, something along those lines. But what is interesting in talking to Brady this week, I'll have an interview for a conversation I had with him up on the Bonfire Sports YouTube channel a little bit later this week, is that while the run maybe numbers were subpar, the short pass game, the check down pass game, is essentially the run game in the CFL today. It started with Paul Appolice as OC and Andrew Harris, as a 1,000-yard receiver, or nearly 1,000-yard receiver when he had 1,000 yards rushing. He nearly went 1K, had over, I think he had 105 receptions one year that broke a CFL record for running backs. It started with that. And now as Buck Pierce is the offensive coordinator, a lot of look and feel similar to Paul Appolice's offense. It is still that check down, short pass game. It's a 1-yard downfield target to Brady Oliveira. And it essentially is the run game. So can you look too much into those 45 yards rushing Brady had against the Rough Riders? Yeah, maybe a little bit. But the weather is going to it's going to be pretty good here in Winnipeg on Saturday. I think they're saying a high of, 8 or 10 degrees. It's going to drop a little bit, after kickoff, but low wind, I think, will be a very significant factor, especially for both quarterbacks. And we know how Winnipeg's, immaculate gust of wind went for them in Montreal a couple weeks ago. So wind is obviously maybe more at the forefront of Winnipeg football fans' minds right now than, say, Brady Oliveira in particular. But it'll be interesting to see how that all shakes out. Brady is once again up for the most outstanding player in the CFL as the West Division nominee. Same too with most outstanding Canadian. I personally expect him to win both of those awards. I don't know about you guys, but can you give an MOP to a quarterback on a non-playoff team? I think it would be a little bit of a stretch. And I think the West Division voters are probably going to come through for Brady to be the league's most outstanding player.
Well, you may not be able to give it to a quarterback on a non-playoff team. I would submit that you could probably give it to a defensive back on a playoff team, but I'm just throwing that out there. Who am I?
That's true. Yes, that's true. Tyrese Beverett. Right. Yeah. That is very true.
Oh, nice. So 8 degrees, sunny, no wind. Rum Hut's going to be lined up huge. Let's switch gears here. Tonight, Utah takes on the red-hot Winnipeg Jets. If not the best team, one of the best teams in the NHL to get rolling this year. What are the rumblings with the ownership and the Chipman? What's the story? Is there a risk that the Winnipeg Jets could be on their way out of town? Is there any merit to this? What's rumbling on Twitter?
No, honestly, no, there isn't.
Okay.
This happens almost annually now. This team went a decade from returning to Winnipeg or, coming back, the Jets 2.0 in 2011, a decade of sellouts. Every single game, and obviously those whiteout playoff games as well, to being 3,000 short in the smallest rink in the National Hockey League. It's 15,200 and change, 225, I think. So these conversations always come about. And when a team starts 11-1-0, I'll just kind of, erase any doubt. They are the best team in the National Hockey League right now. The Toronto Maple Leafs came to town and beat them, I think, for the 6th straight time they've beat the Winnipeg Jets. Ever since Mark Scheifele came into the locker room and was caught on a microphone and video camera saying, "Is there anything better than beating the Toronto Maple Leafs?" The Jets have not beat the Leafs since then. But outside of that, they got the best goalie in the world in Connor Hellebuck. They have a defense core that is shown to be incredibly deep. I think Josh Morrissey is going to be on Team Canada at the Four Nations tournament. Mark Scheifele, Kyle Connor is at least a point in every single game this year. He's 1 goal off the NHL lead and has 19 points in 12 games. I think that's 7th in the NHL. They're clicking on all cylinders, and they do it with a defensive style of hockey. Why aren't the fans coming out? I think that will slowly change. But the reality is everybody's going to the Blue Bombers game. They're having their 5th sellout this season. It's going to be 33,000 plus on Saturday night. And the Winnipeg Jets, it's an expensive ticket. I think the economic realities is very similar to the economic realities in Saskatchewan and those decreased attendance numbers at Mosaic the last couple of years. The National Hockey League is a multi-million dollar operation, and it costs a lot of money to pay the players, pay the staff, keep the lights on in the building, insurance, all of those sorts of things. It's not like Winnipeg can lower their costs significantly. But is it at the point where Winnipeg is at risk of losing this franchise? Based on conversations we've had with the owner of this team, who's backed by David Thompson of Thomson Reuters and the richest man in Canada. I think he's got $25 billion of net worth. They have enough of a safety net there that they're not going to encounter something like Winnipeg Enterprises did, the ownership of the first iteration of the Winnipeg Jets back in the early 1990s, when a $7 million contract to Keith Tkachuk forced them to trade Teemu Selanne. Absolutely abhorrent, horrifying moment in Winnipeg sports history. And, losing the franchise that brought the tears to the faces of so many here in southern Manitoba and surrounding areas.
The carbon tax strikes again. Maybe that can help lower the costs, the input costs in Winnipeg. The Utah team, 11. It's 11. What's the Jets record? Is it 11-1-1 or 11-0-1?
11-1-0. Yeah.
11-1-0. Wow. Gary Bettman's probably like, please do not keep this up. We do not need them in the Stanley Cup final. They all want the Yankees, Dodgers. Doesn't matter the league. They want the biggest teams. Darrin, we appreciate the time. I know you'll be in the press box Saturday, not rooting for your Bombers. You'll be completely independent. You're going to be like neutral Switzerland. Riders, Bombers in the West final. We won't ask you for a prediction on this game because a lot can happen. What do you think is going to happen in the East final? We'll end on this. Who do you think comes out between Toronto and Montreal?
I think the Montreal Alouettes are a superior football team to the Toronto Argonauts. The big play worked for them against an Ottawa Redblacks team that was not playing very good football going into the postseason. I just really believe that the Montreal Alouettes are built right. They got their head right. I think Jason Moss has really evolved as a head coach, knows how to coach a team on and off the field, maybe something he didn't know how to do as well when he was the head coach of the Edmonton Elks or Eskimos at that time. I just think Montreal is a team that can't be stopped right now, and they're going to bring it on Saturday afternoon.
All right. That's Darrin Bauming at Bonfire, WPG, if you want to follow him on X. Thanks, my man. Let's do this again. We'll catch up when the Jets are, after the All-Star break, leading the league by 35 points over any other team. And we'll go from there.